Absurdist Asylum, a very special edition of Absurdist Asylum. We're here in the official, unofficial studios of the podcast. I'm here, as always, joined by my co-host, Brad Cousy. Brad, how you doing today?
Good. How about you?
Oh, no complaints here. I'm just happy to be here, happy to see your smiling face. And speaking of happy, today's episode, we watched the Happytime Murders. If you don't know about this movie, it's the Muppets in real-life LA. And there are no holds barred when it comes to adult humor. Brad, had you seen this movie before we spoke about it?
Yeah, so me and my twin brother went and watched it in the theaters, and I died laughing. You hit it right on the head when you said it really channels that whole Muppets. It's like Muppets mixed with the with the rated R rating. There's a lot of don't take your kids to this movie is what I'm saying.
Yeah, this movie was actually made by Brian Henson, who is the son of the Jim Henson, who created the Muppets and had a hand in creating Sesame Street. And Sesame Street actually sued this movie for, let me make sure I get this right, sued them for tarnishing the brand, specifically because in one of the trailers they used the tagline, "All Sesame, no Street." I don't think that anything really came of this movie. It seemed like a pretty frivolous lawsuit considering that, Greg the Bunny did a very similar thing when it came to puppets like that. And it didn't exactly, the tagline was specifically like, "This isn't Sesame Street." So I don't know if that went anywhere. I didn't get that far in my research hole.
It's mainly brand recognition. A lot of TV shows and movies, when they start even just mentioning the other brand name, you can get sued for it. So you usually try to stay away from that. I'm actually surprised they even went with that tagline because they had to have known they might have gotten sued.
Yeah, I think especially knowing that Brian Henson had a hand in creating this, he was inspired to do a movie like this because he does have an adult puppet show like live in Las Vegas. And he said it actually, from the idea of making this movie to the point where it actually got made, it took them 6 years to secure the financing because he didn't want, he said that this movie wasn't possible on a low budget. And you see some of the puppets and how they're worked into the world that we know, maybe not know personally as in LA, but you can tell that this movie was created on some money.
Definitely had a budget. There's a lot of scenes throughout the whole movie. Even just the cast alone had to be at least a quarter of the budget. I mean, you got Melissa McCarthy in there. I can't remember who some of the other puppets are, but there's a lot of famous people that voice the characters of a lot of the puppets.
Yeah, Maya Rudolph was one in this. Elizabeth Banks was another famous person that I was surprised to see in this movie. And, you got to kind of wonder how they get these names. Melissa McCarthy, I'm sure, was the big draw. They said that they wanted her specifically because she does so well with these types of movies. It's a kind of like a love story to noir films and the classic buddy cop. And Melissa McCarthy said herself that she loves doing movies about cops because she's got a lot of family members in her family that are cops, and so she loves that dynamic between partners, and she could see that in her everyday life.
She's been I think she's been a cop or detective and at least in 5 or 6 movies that I've seen. So
yeah,
she's now got that kind of role built into her acting career.
Yeah, the one that I could think of specifically was Heat with Sandra Bullock, and
that's great.
The roles were kind of reversed because in this movie, our main character, Frank.
I don't remember his last name.
I don't remember. The puppet's name is Frank, the main puppet, and he's kind of like a disgraced cop. You get the story that he ruined the idea of puppets being cops in this city for all puppets because he supposedly missed a shot that he was supposed to take that was against another puppet. So the whole narrative went out that puppets aren't going to shoot other puppets when it comes right down to it. So there is not only puppet racism within the police force itself, but you can kind of see it in the everyday kind of almost B-roll shots that they shoot for. They're not necessarily B-roll because they were set up specifically for the movie to kind of give that idea. But you can tell that people treat puppets shitty in this city, and that's just kind of the norm.
Yeah, they kind of really float that line of almost racism just between the whole dynamic of puppets and humans. But I mean, there's so many movies that do that these days, like Bright on Netflix with Will Smith and Joel Edgerton. That was kind of floating the lines. It's actually kind of the same story plot line.
Yeah, and they had, I mean, like it was done with Disney and Zootopia in a different sense of the word. But yeah, I think having this movie start off on the ground that puppets and humans aren't equal, set in motion the plot as to what starts actually creating the story, other than just this background that we get between Melissa McCarthy, who was the partner who essentially told everyone that, you know, puppet cops aren't going to shoot other puppets, because she was being held hostage by, I don't think the name of the puppet wasn't important, who she was being held hostage. And Frank winds up missing his shot and accidentally killing another puppet.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of movies these days are really kind of floating that line of more realism. And so by having that dynamic, it not only sets up the tone in the whole movie, but it's what drives the whole movie forward. And then as you go through, you know, the first and the second and the third act, you kind of get that whole dynamic.
Yeah, so I have this written off as a bad movie. Like, you watch the trailers and it looked childish, and there are certainly parts in this movie that were childish, even though it was definitely adult humor. But you said you went and saw it in theaters, and when I was trying to watch this for the podcast, I always like to, you know, include my wife and my friends when they're around, and I was like, hey, you guys want to watch the Happytime Murders? And I could not get anybody to watch this movie with me, except for you, Brad, of course.
Yeah, actually, it was a packed movie theater when we went. It was 3 weeks after it opened, and I thought, like, oh, man, like, it's going to be a nice open theater, and it was still pretty packed. So, I mean, it did pretty well, I believe.
Yeah, it's interesting. This movie really did have a lot of good pieces. Like, they had an interesting, you know, background for this character. They had, like we already spoke about, great actors and actresses in these parts. It had a compelling world. Like I said, the world felt lived in because it's a place we already know, and they just kind of made the effort to, you know, take out certain parts and add puppets, which, you know, if you're doing a movie like this, that's got to be probably your main goal, is like, this can't feel campy. Like, it can't be just, oh, there's puppets on top of this. The world has to feel like it goes on beyond the movie.
I think another thing that we might not have mentioned was it's not just puppets being in the movie. This is a puppet action movie, and there's not many of those out there. Even the Muppet movies weren't very, you know, thrilling. They were just kind of like, hey, here's Kermit, and here's Miss Piggy. Where this one's like, there's more action, there's chase scenes, it's like living the life of a police officer, but puppets are now in it. So I think, for me, that's why I really wanted to watch it, because this just really hasn't been done before, especially in an R-rated type.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there that it wasn't something that we had seen before. So having such high effort be put into what would be perceived visually as just like a child's gag, you know, it's just saying puppets on screen with people. You're like, oh, this is fucking, you know, it's Sesame Street or whatever the case may be. It's legally distinct from Sesame Street. We should touch on that. But
don't sue us.
Don't sue us. But yeah, I think that the effort that went into this movie is really what makes you appreciate it, especially, you know, you get a cut at the very end where they show a couple of the behind the scenes, and you see that, you know, they built sets that were big enough to accommodate having a human like below the ground so they could have their hand up and be working the puppets. And the green screen effects that they put into this movie, I didn't realize until watching some of the behind the scenes just how much green screen was put into this movie, because not only do they have to edit out the puppeteers, but they've got to, I mean, some of the sets that I thought were real, there's a scene where the main character Frank and Elizabeth Banks' character meet up in this dark alley. That whole place was green screen, and I did not realize that until seeing the scene in some of the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, I worked with puppets a little bit. A buddy of mine at the film school shot a whole short film based on a puppet, and I'll tell you what, the lighting a person with flesh is so much more difficult versus lighting it. Like, it's completely different from lighting a puppet, because puppets don't have like that that glimmer, that sheen that comes off of us. And so I always remember watching the movie the second time and thinking, like, how the fuck did they light this and even, like, get it to look good?
Yeah, and so you mentioned flesh. I guess that kind of is a roundabout way of getting us into the actual plot of this movie. There is a show that was like a beloved show back in the day. It was the first time puppets and humans had ever worked together on TV, called the Happytime Gang, right? The Happytime Gang. Mm-hmm. And the way that our main character is embroiled into this is that his brother was a character on the Happytime Gang. And it's funny, they make a little joke like how he's become too fake by hanging out in Hollywood too much. And he's actually bleached his skin or bleached his fur or whatever.
Fabric,
the fabric that makes up the puppet to be more and more pale, to look more and more human. And he's clearly gotten a nose job since the show came out. And it's just funny how they like, oh, you're so phony. You're such a Hollywood type, and how they play that in, and how they make that a thing for puppets. Like, you only see it that one time, but it's funny to think that that's just like a procedure that puppets have done to blend in more, even though there's no way that you're not going to recognize that this isn't a puppet.
Well, that's a real thing they do in Hollywood too. A lot of actors and actresses, they will bleach their skin to be more white, because they think they're going to have a better career if they're closer to white than they are than their ethnicity. And so, like, I thought that was actually pretty humorous how they added that in. Somebody who wrote this or whoever produced it must have like had that idea and said like, hey, this is a real thing. We got to throw it in there. How they even thought of that? Like, hey, let's bleach a puppet.
Yeah. And so at this point in the movie, we find out that Frank is a disgraced ex-cop. He is, kind of a pariah when it comes to being on the force. And I forget how he gets there. He's following up a lead on the first murder that occurs, and he winds up at a porno shop. And in this porno shop, not only are they like filming a tentacle porn / I don't know what to call it, where there's just like an octopus like jerking off all of the cow's udders, which is like, if you took your kid to this movie, which I hear happened reading some of the reviews, like people took their kids to this movie thinking that I don't know what they thought. Like, how do you watch the trailer? I hope maybe they didn't watch the trailer, but like that's the line in the sand where you should walk out. Like, I don't know how some of the reviews of parents that I saw in there made it all the way to the sex scene later in the movie before they realized that this wasn't the kids' movie. But yeah, so there's a octopus jerking off the cow's udders, and the guy is looking for a very specific porno mag that the suspect was like, I forget, the suspect had a connection to. And so he asked the porno shop owner, like, do you have a list of names of all the people who have bought this porno mag? And the owner goes, oh, of course, we're NSA compliant, which just tickled my insides, because that was hilarious. Like, the idea of going to a porno shop and having to register with the NSA what magazine you buy is pretty uproarious.
And that's actually one of my favorite scenes that happens there. And we'll touch on it here in a minute, but this is where the action really starts to pick up and it really starts to separate. Like, this is a completely different movie.
Yeah, I think that the fact that, and then there was the dog scene with the dog and the firefighter.
I forgot about that part.
Yeah, there was a puppet dog who was like whipping and biting this firefighter chained to a bed while he's digging through all the records of this porno shop. And like, that's a scene where if you weren't watching it to like get to the end, which I don't know, I can't turn on a movie without finishing it. Like, that's just not my thing. But that's a point where I might have turned it off, because it's just like, I don't know that I need this in my life, where we're just watching a puppet dog biting a real firefighter's nipples, making him scream. But so yeah, it gets into the action of the movie, and this porno shop gets essentially what looks like a holdup or a robbery, but then this masked character, we don't even really get a full like body shot. We just kind of get shots of, a robed character in this porno shop, and starts blasting away all these puppets. And I don't know what you'd expect when a puppet gets shot in a film, but they did it perfectly. It looked like they exploded a stuffed animal and just cotton everywhere. They destroy the bunny who was there, who was also part of the Happytime gang, and the shop owner, and the two puppets that were filming the cow porno in the back. And it was quite the scene. It really, I think if you made it to that part, you're like, you give this movie another chance. You're like, all right, if you're going to do the puppet murder scene, you did it right. So I think that worked out really in their favor.
I think that there's always a part, usually it's anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes of a movie. It's called the hook. And it's the moment where, okay, do you have my attention, or am I going to check out and go watch something else? And for me, that was the hook. And that really helped me, like, all right, I got to see where the rest of this goes.
Yeah, a hook indeed. So, of course, just like any cop movie, our main character is not necessarily pinned for the murders, but the cops do find it suspicious that, like, what is this guy doing here? And how is he the only one that survives? And so he's kind of on the cops' radar. Joe McHale shows up as an FBI agent who, I don't know, whether you like or don't like Joe McHale is up to you, but he does become the butt of the joke throughout the thing. Like, it's pretty clear that there's like a cops versus FBI sentiment, like you do see in a lot of other movies. But I can only imagine that doing those types of scenes with a puppet that's giving you your back and forth is maybe one of the more difficult things to do in acting. Melissa McCarthy said that she was very worried about having that kind of interaction with the fake object, but by the end of the movie, she was just talking to the Frank puppet as if he was just the actor. She was worried she was going to be talking to the puppeteer, and she was like, "Oh, by the time it was done, like, he was my buddy. I was friends with Puppet Frank."
I can totally understand that, because when actors work together, they kind of build like a mini bond while they're rehearsing, and so they kind of know like their tails back and forth, and they know when to say their line. But when you have a puppet that has no emotion, no facial, stigments, like, how are you supposed to read that thing? You can't. It's a puppet. It's not moving. So I also read that Melissa McCarthy, she was talking to the director at some point, and I researched this part. She was talking to the director, and she was like, "Hey, I don't know how you want me to play some of these scenes. Like, I'm supposed to be, one of these scenes, she's like, gets really excruciatingly high, and we'll probably talk about that later. But like, she's like, how am I supposed to interact with all these fake characters? I'm the only person in the scene." And basically he just said, just do whatever you think. Whatever you think's going to work. And surprisingly, like, they had very low amount of takes. She just nailed it every single time. And I think it's just because she just gave in to the whole, I'm here with puppets and here we go. We'll see what happens. I don't think anyone knew how this movie was going to turn out until it was finally edited.
But, watching those behind the scenes, I can't tell, other than like one of the Jackass movies or something ridiculous along those lines, I can't tell if there's another movie where people had more fun making it. Like, all the behind the scenes, like, everybody's trying not to crack up. Everybody's laughing as soon as the director yells cut. Melissa McCarthy's just like shit talking with the puppets off scene as if they were a real person. And, it's like, you got to give her credit. Like, Melissa McCarthy isn't exactly my favorite actor, but she does, take this role head on and kind of give it her all. And people gave her a lot of flack about this movie, and I can understand why, because it's a fucking adult puppet movie. But I think she really made the movie what it was.
Yeah, I don't think, when I saw the trailer, if I didn't see Melissa McCarthy, I don't know if I would have watched it. I don't know who else they would have even gotten to be the headliner for this. So the fact that they'd even got her and that she signed on, it sold it for me.
Yeah, and this movie was nominated for 6 2018 Razzies. And if you don't know what the Razzies are, they're just kind of some mean awards for the worst movies out there. And Melissa McCarthy herself was nominated for Most Calamitous Performance by a Woman in 2018. And the movie was nominated for Top 5 cinematic casualties of 2018. And it's like, I don't know, it seemed like an easy target. After actually watching the movie and having the opinion of it that I did, knowing that everybody just shat all over this after the fact, it seems like, I don't want to say like picking on the weak kid at school, because I don't want to say that this movie was weak, but, you know, it's like puppets aren't going to fight back. You know, it's like no matter what you say about the puppet, you're not going to have to worry about the blowback from some actor, maybe Melissa McCarthy, but I'm sure she caught plenty of shit from Ghostbusters and just learned to keep her mouth shut when it comes to, like, or learn to ignore that kind of stuff when it comes to negative feedback. And so it's like, it seemed like you could easily find something that was more worth your time if you're going to shit on something.
I actually just had a thought. It would be really hilarious if they had, like, right after all the blowback happened from the movie, they have the main character, Frank Puppet, like, in an interview. Mm-hmm. And, like, someone from, like, TMZ is interviewing the puppet, and then he just starts talking shit about all the humans. That would have been hilarious. I wish somebody would have done that.
Yeah, just like, I want to say Triumph, the cowardly dog, but I know that's not right. But Triumph, the comic dog from... Conan, yeah. Mm-hmm. Or he just, like, he all he does is talk shit to people. I mean, I miss Triumph. Yeah, that's good puppets interaction there. So, you mentioned that they kind of go, they're investigating these murders, and Melissa McCarthy and her former partner team up again to kind of get to the bottom of this. And they go to find another ex-member of the Happytime Gang show. And it turns out he's in with a seedy crowd. He's in with, like, what you would equivalent to, like, a puppet gang. And they hang out at, like, a seedy bar and bet and do drugs and things like that.
Almost kind of like a mob.
Yeah, almost. Mm-hmm. Because at this point, Frank has... inferred that it wasn't just a robbery gone wrong at this porno shop, it was a hit, and he guessed that it was the bunny who was there, who happened to be part of the Happytime Gang back in the day as well. So they go visit this guy, and we learn that Melissa McCarthy is actually part puppet, because after she was shot by the guy who took her hostage, she had to have her liver replaced and was dragged into a puppet hospital, essentially. So instead of, waiting for an ambulance getting her to a person's hospital, they take her to the puppet hospital where they replace her liver with a puppet liver. And in order to prove that this is the case, because these seedy puppets don't want to be hanging out with a human, especially a human cop, in order to prove that this is the case, they make her do a giant-ass line of sugar, which they says is like ecstasy to a puppet liver, to a puppet in general, but because of her liver, this will kill a human, but to a puppet, it's pure ecstasy.
This is probably one of my favorite scenes, because she's, like, trying to prove herself, even though she doesn't really have to. Like, she's the police; she doesn't have to do shit. But I think a part of her wants to, like, you can see it in her character. A part of her wants to, like, kind of mend that whole relationship between her and Frank and the whole puppet community. But when she takes it, oh my God, this is, like I said, one of my favorite scenes. So she snorts the whole line of sugar and she passes out. And everyone thinks, shit, we killed her. We just killed a cop. And then she wakes up out of nowhere, kind of freaking the fuck out and being like, oh, that's some good shit. And she lives. And so that's how she proves that she's a puppet. And then they kind of trust her. And they start giving her information about what, start answering her questions.
So I got bad news. We fucked up pretty badly. It's not Frank. It's Phil Phillips.
Oh, my God.
Frank, Phil, generic white name. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, so if you've made it this far without leaving a comment, congratulations. You've got more self-restraint than most on the internet. Yeah, so she, like, gets down on the sugar and comes to, and this is like one of the background scenes that you can see behind the scenes of, she's just having like a raucous good time with these puppets. And while Phil is like investigating in the background, she's kind of distracting them by playing cards with them and doing more drugs and drinking syrup as if it's like whiskey, which I thought was hilarious. The fact that later on in the movie we find out she's got like a sugar addiction, and one of the characters like goes through her fridge and just starts dumping out bottles of syrup.
Oh yeah, that's a great part too. But during this scene when Frank, when Phil, whatever his name is,
Phil Phillips
is trying to get the information so they can get the hell out of there. If I remember correctly, when I read this article, they let her just kind of say whatever the hell she wanted. She was completely off the cuff. And they did take after take after take, and every take kept getting better and funnier and better and funnier. And so eventually they walked away with like the best things that weren't even scripted. And then I dug a little bit farther, and that's actually a lot of her own lines were lines that she asked the director, "Hey, can I just try something?" And they went with her idea most of the time. So that alone makes her a little bit more invested in this because she essentially wrote her own lines.
Yeah, and Melissa McCarthy, one of her breakout roles is in Gilmore Girls. And if you know anything about Gilmore Girls, that movie is all dialogue all the time. Like, you could turn the TV off and just have the sound running and would know exactly what's going on in Gilmore Girls because they just talk. And that's one thing that people love about that show. And that's one thing that I have to assume that Melissa McCarthy is good at, is just kind of like ad-libbing and keeping a conversation rolling. And a lot of the times in her movies, her lines are scripted, and you don't really get to see that side of her. But when she's sitting with puppets, and I would assume that the people who are playing the puppets, because it's the puppeteer who's actually voicing the puppet of Phil. I don't know if that's the same for all the puppets, but the main character is he not only working a puppet, but he's ad-libbing back and forth with Melissa as this puppet. So I think like there's a lot of things about this movie below the surface level that give you more respect for it after you've watched it. And I think that all the hate on this is just like, it's an easy target. Like, everybody compared this to Sausage Party, which I don't think it was. I think Sausage Party was, I don't know, it wasn't my favorite movie. Neither was this. I'm not going to go watch this again anytime soon, considering the fact that I've watched it a couple times. But I think I would watch this before I watch Sausage Party any day. Yeah,
I had a lot more fun watching this, and I enjoyed myself a lot more with this than I did Sausage Party. Sausage Party just seemed like one of those. This is definitely a Seth Rogen movie, or they've got what's his name, Nick Kroll's in there playing the douche cup. Like, come on, like of course they're gonna have something like that, but this was a little bit more out of the box and unusual, and that's why it piqued my interest. But going through, getting to throughout the rest of the movie, I can't remember what happens directly after they leave. It's those two puppets that hit on her with Maya Rudolph, I think.
Oh, are you talking about the crab and the... Yeah. So there's a scene where Melissa McCarthy is investigating on, it looks like Long Beach or kind of near Muscle Beach in Santa... I don't know, one of those fucking California hippie towns. But there's like a crab and a warthog-looking puppet that are just like... they're just like really like bad at flirting with her and like sending out horrible lines, and she picks up the crab and like boots it down the beach. We've skipped over kind of where we've definitely skipped over the plot in Phil's office where this I want to say attractive puppet, but it wasn't like physically attractive to me, but you could tell that's what they were going for, comes in and kind of does that whole noir thing, like, I've got a problem and I need somebody to help me. And she's looking for a detective and tells him that somebody is bribing her because she's a sex fiend and wants to just basically like expose the fact that she's a sex fiend. And it's like, you can already tell where this is going to go. It doesn't happen right there. But she visits him again. And in this visit, we meet Maya Rudolph, who is Phil's secretary, and you can kind of tell she's got like a little bit of an affinity for Phil. Kind of maybe you could call it an attraction. Maybe she just like feels motherly towards him, but you could tell there's something that's not being said going on there. And the scene I'm sure everybody knows about in the trailer. I'm sure it was on any review that you would see of this movie, is the puppet sex scene. Now, I don't know where you have to be in your head to write a puppet sex scene, to write one that's this explicit, but man, did they really go for it. Brad, you got any thoughts on this? You want to critique a sex scene for the first time on the podcast?
Yeah, my first critique sex scene that has to do with puppets. Well, first off, I would say I wonder, like, during the writing process, however they came up with the idea of, hey, let's do a sex scene, because back in the old, film noir days, there was always the detective in a darkly lit room, and a beautiful woman comes in, and like Jason was saying, like, she needs help, and there's always that attraction. Well, I always wonder, like, when they wrote this sex scene, was it supposed to be funny, or did they write it, like, legitly romantic, and then it was just too fucking weird? And then, like, we gotta make this funny. But from beginning to end, the girl puppet comes in and starts kind of putting on the moves, and the detective Phillips just kind of, like, not into it, and then at some point, like, he kind of, like, falls under her gaze. There's a lot of close-up shots of, like, the puppet's, like, cleavage with, like, fabric cleavage, and, like, the big pushy red lips and the hair, and at some point, I think she makes the move on him. I can't remember.
Yeah, she, like, throws his leg her leg over his shoulder.
That's
as
what
they're
it was.
getting ready to leave. Yeah,
and then they just kind of just get into it. And imagine taking two socks on your hands and slamming them together. That's pretty much how this sex scene works.
That was it. It's like that's like another scene where it looked like they were having too much fun making it. They're cracking up behind the scenes. They're trying to keep a straight face. This is one of the things that made me realize just how much CGI how much green screen was in this movie. Is they had a guy in a green screen suit with a stick attached to the girl puppet's tongue that was like 1.5 feet long, and he, like, just gently, like, licks it up and down Phil's face, and you could never tell, like, watching the movie, that there's, like, in the actual shot, there's a whole dude in a green suit behind them.
Doing the action.
Yeah, doing the action. It's like you can tell there's something a little weird about how the tongue moves. There's another thing about this movie is a lot of the puppet movements, you can tell there's something not quite right. Some people were thinking that it was like they had a dude in a puppet suit and then they scaled up the image behind him to make it look like smaller. But you could tell it was like just the way that they were moving, there was something not quite right. And seeing the behind the scenes stuff, you can tell what it was, is that they had to, like, green screen out all the people that were moving these puppets. But I don't think it detracts from the movie at all. What some people say detracts from the movie is the silly string incident.
The finish.
Yeah, it gets to the point where obviously that all sex does is it comes to an end. Yeah, and in true, I don't know, this was like a stroke of genius, or just like I don't know how to describe it, but they have just like a can of silly string underneath the puppet. You can't see it, but it's like indicates that, like, he's coming and there's just like silly string going everywhere. And then I think the part that got me the most was the fact that he, like, stops and he's like, oh god, and he goes off again, and there's just like silly string all over the walls. And Maya Rudolph's sitting in the other room where they can hear everything. The FBI and the chief of police is there, and she just pulls out a bottle of cleaning solution and sits it on the desk like she's done this before. Like she's getting ready to go in there and clean up afterwards.
We forgot to mention that part. So in the middle, just before the puppets start having sex, the FBI come in and they're like, we want to talk to Philip. And she's like, oh, well, he's in a meeting right now. And I can't remember. Joel McHale says something, and then right then and there, it cuts to Maya Rudolph. And in the background, Philip has a glass door, like a frosted glass door. And he says something, and then the puppets get slammed up against the glass door, and they're humping against the glass window. And, like, he's just, like, kind of shell-shocked, but Maya Rudolph's just sitting there like, oh, this happens all the time.
Yeah, he says, because you can clearly hear what's going on in the other room. And he goes, is that what I think it is? And then, bam, they slam up against the glass. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what you think it is.
Hands down, my favorite scene in the movie. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I think at this point, you're already along for the ride, so having that scene go as far as it did is probably just like icing on the maybe bad choice of words. But so yeah, after this, I think the movie does kind of like knuckle down and get a little bit more into the plot. Phil's brother, who's actually part of the Happytime gang, is also murdered in this, and at this point, we already definitely know their murders, like, and we can see the character, who's the shrouded character, basically open up a series of dog kennels and just let the dogs loose in this guy's like rich house where he's sitting in his hot tub. And you have a favorite scene in the movie. I think this is my favorite scene in the movie.
This one's good too.
Is that the dogs literally just grab him out of the hot tub and start tearing him up like he's just a chew toy, which I think that was a stroke of genius as far as like, how do we kill this character? Oh, we don't. We just let the dogs tear him up because he looks just like a chew toy. Like, my dog fucking loves stuffed animals and destroys them just as fast as they did it in that. And watching the behind the scenes, it's actually like they actually just like gave dogs a puppet like that to just tear up, which I thought was hilarious. So yeah, it's like clearly now we have multiple characters from the Happytime gang being murdered. We forgot to mention that the guy that they went and saw at the CE like biker bar got shot up just outside the bar with Phil standing right there. And while Melissa McCarthy's like having fun and partying on the sugar. So I forget who was, Elizabeth Banks.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the last remaining characters from the Happytime gang is the human on the show, who's played by Elizabeth Banks. And Phil kind of goes into this little rant about how they used to have a thing for each other. We do kind of see in a flashback they kissed, but it doesn't really indicate that it was like more than just like a good luck kiss type thing. But now we know that they used to have a thing for each other, and they were in a pretty serious relationship from what it sounded like. But he goes to find her, and she's stripping. She's stripping at a puppet bar, and there's rabbits like lined up at the bottom of the dance table, and they're putting out money for her, and she starts just like peeling a carrot onto the rabbit as if she's doing like some puppet bukkake show. And I was like, that's what surprised me most, is that Elizabeth Banks, who at this point had already directed like the Power Rangers movie and Pitch Perfect 2, allowed herself to be put in this situation, which, I don't know, I guess there becomes a point where you don't take yourself so seriously and you know you're signing up for something fun. And I think that's the biggest draw to this movie, is it just looked like people were having fun. I know I've said that 16 times, but
it is called the Happytime Murders.
Yeah, and it's like, one, you're working with Brian Henson. Jim Henson's been dead for a long time. Like, you know that there's only a certain amount of these movies are going to be made because, Henson is still owned by whoever owns Henson. I want to say Disney, but yeah, I think so, because they're on ABC. Disney. Yeah. So, it's like, this isn't something that's going to come around a lot. And because it's not under the, like, Jim Henson name, you know that you're still having it done by his son, who is, obviously probably been around the craft longer than anybody as far as puppetry goes. Probably as long as he's been alive. Just the opportunity to make something like this, it can't come around very often. This
is probably where he decided, I need to make something now before I'm not able to make something like this again. And even if it doesn't put him on the map, I think he just wants to have fun. And when you're talking about Elizabeth Banks, why she would even sign on to do this, I would think it's because at some point when you get to that celebrity status in your career and you've just busted your ass day and night to get to that status, you just want to have fun now. Like, you've made it. Like, you're not like, you're past your prime. You just want to do whatever the hell you want to do now. You've got a bunch of money. You've got a bunch of talent. Someone will make a movie with you. So you pick a fun movie and you have a good time. And that's why a lot of actors after the age of 35, 40, that's where they start getting less serious roles and getting more, whatever they want to do.
Yeah. So after they kind of catch up at the strip club and he's walking her out to her car, she gets into the car and he turns around, starts walking away, and the car explodes. So she's dead. He kind of rules her out as a suspect. Now, was there a point in this movie that you thought you were like onto the plot?
A lot of crime movies, I always think I know who it is. And not saying that just because I go to film school, I'm usually pretty accurate, but I usually am pretty accurate. But this one was a little bit harder for me to judge. I only kind of thought it was her right up until this point. Because at this point I thought, oh, well, she probably died. But then I thought in the back of my head, well, that's a little overplayed. And they do that all the time in other crime shows. So then that actually kind of made me think it's probably her. And she's going to come back at the end at some point.
Yeah,
but my twin brother was like, he had no idea. He's like, well, it couldn't have been her. She died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that... I think that's part of the fun of watching like a crime or mystery movie is to try and figure out where, if you can figure it out before the movie's over. And yeah, the suspicion was on Elizabeth Banks. For anybody who's watching it, she, goes from this famous TV star on a show that everybody watches, and now she's stripping. And you kind of find out that one of the motivations behind all of this is that the contract that's written up for the Happytime Gang, each living member gets the contract for the people who have already passed. They're writing this assuming that it's going to come with old age, but it gets divided up among the living members as opposed to just like, oh, that percentage disappears. The percentage of the remaining contract gets divided up among the living members. So that's why Frank thinks that people are going after this Happytime Murders gang. So, yeah, now that she's gone, I don't think there are any more people left. Oh, no, there's
one left.
What's it called? Goober or whatever? Like, it's just a weird, like, kind of raggedy-looking puppet. I can't remember.
I don't know what the hell he really was.
But, yeah, and so Melissa McCarthy, that's why she's on the Santa Monica Pier, or the Long Beach or wherever it may be, is she's looking for this character who is the last living character of the Happytime Gang. And she finds him in just like another crack den. And he's also murdered, which leaves no living members. But the way he's murdered is he's drowned by this puppet character. And when they pull him out of the water, they pull his body out of the water, they just like wring him out like a towel. Which was... I mean, I don't know. The mind who came up with all these different ways to abuse puppets, I hope that his insurance affords him therapy because they're quite funny, but also, kind of disturbing.
I kind of like the way they did that because, I mean, not kind of, I love the way they did that because when you watch, like, I don't know, like Law & Order or CSI, there's always an episode where there's a body in the water and they drag it out and they kind of be really ginger with touching it and they put it up in a body bag. The cop just walks up and just picks it up by the foot and just wrings it out like it's nothing, like it's a rag. Mm-hmm. And then I think they toss it in the back of a car. I can't remember what happens.
Yeah, so now that they don't treat it like a body, they treat it like a piece of trash.
Which kind of, it plays into that whole, like, puppets are not the same as us.
Yeah, it definitely plays into the idea that people don't like puppets. So there are two more members of the Happytime Murders left. There's a brother and sister duo who you find out kind of earlier on in the movie that they were just like banging the whole time that they were doing the Happytime Murders, which is just another like layer to throw on this like WTF cake is just like, oh, there's puppet incest now too. And so Frank and Edwards, that is Melissa McCarthy's character's name, not Frank.
Philip.
And Edwards go to this barbecue rib / church that these two incestuous puppets own. And they go and they obviously do like the police come to the door type thing, but then they hear screaming inside. And so they go investigate. One goes to the front, one goes to the back. And Melissa McCarthy's character comes upon this room full of kids, a room with two kids in it. They're just like screaming into a mirror for whatever reason. And she gets their attention and they turn around and you can see that they're like inbred puppets. Because these two incestuous puppet characters who they had children apparently is the implication there. But yeah, one's got one eye and the other one's got three eyes, and I mean, just going there with puppets. The fact that somebody had to make that, it puts a smile on my face. Not that I'm like happy about incest, but it cracks me up that they did that.
Somebody got paid to do that.
Yeah, somebody got paid. It's like living the dream, and, you know. So yeah, they get there and they find out that those two characters have already been murdered, which leaves nobody left on the Happytime gang. And I forget exactly how the transition happens, but we come back to the police station and we find out that this like buxom puppet who hired Phil to investigate this blackmailing case is now in the police station telling the cops that Phil was actually the one who murdered all these people. And like, so she's ratting on him, telling the cops that it was all him. And in the course of this interview that they're giving her, they basic instinct a puppet. I don't know how to describe it other than like she like does the leg crossover and she flashes her vagina vag, which is just like vagina vag, her puppet vag, which is just like covered in purple muff fur.
She also has purple hair too, doesn't she?
No, she's got red hair. She's got red hair, but the purple vag fur. So the carpet does not match the drapes, in fact. But this purple fur, apparently, it's very uncommon amongst puppets. So it gets Melissa McCarthy thinking like, that's pretty rare. And then she thinks, oh wait, when was the last time I saw purple hair on a puppet? And it was actually the daughter of the man who Phil accidentally killed at the very beginning of the movie, the thing that like sparked all this controversy about puppet cops and all that. So they finally figure out that it's not anything to do with the Happytime Murders. It's this girl who essentially wants revenge for Phil killing her father. I know I've seen it before in movies, but it takes a special kind of crazy to have sex with a person that you're trying to set up or to kill. Like, I know I've seen that before in a few movies, but
they do in the Bond movies. Some of the villains are the women and the villains. That didn't sound right. Some of the women villains in Bond movies, they sleep with Bond, and then it turns out like, oh, I'm the evil genius.
Yeah,
or,
sometimes
I'm
the next
working
morning,
for the evil genius. Yeah,
yeah. Sometimes the next morning he wakes up with a gun to his head. So I think, yeah, now at this point the plot's been revealed, and he goes and they chase her to the airport, and at the airport, she obviously gives her little anti-Phil speech and tells everybody why she did it. But we also find out that Elizabeth Banks is not dead, not blown up in a car, but she's been working with this puppet the whole time. So that was my initial thought when I was watching this movie. It was like, oh, it has to be the stripper. And in a sense it was, but it turns out she was just kind of getting played. Like, I forget what the story was that the puppet told her, but it wasn't the actual truth as to why she was just taking money down these guys. Yeah, I think it was probably just money, which is fine. Yeah, so they get to the airport, and this puppet reveals her identity. And Elizabeth, apparently she's married to Elizabeth Banks, which means she's been setting this up for even longer than we would guess in the first place. I forget exactly how it goes. Oh, I remember exactly how it goes down. Yeah, there's a like almost a shot for shot recreation of the first scene where Melissa McCarthy gets held hostage. She's got a gun to her head with the puppet using her as like a human body shield, and Phil has to make the shot. He has to shoot another puppet, and I mean he does so successfully that you get the cotton brains blowing out the back of the puppet's head. And I mean the movie's essentially over at that point, except you kind of get the congratulations, Phil, you did it. I'm going to see about getting you reinstated back on the force. And Joel McHale's kind of mad that he didn't solve the case. And he goes, blah, 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 I'm in the FBI. And Frank goes, what does that stand for? A fucking big idiot? And I don't know that that's like the most well-written line in the movie, but it definitely got a chuckle out of me. So was there anything else about the plot of this movie that you wanted to touch on, Brad?
I mean, I think we summed it up pretty well. It's one of those... If you were to take out all the puppets and replace them with humans, it'd be a basic crime movie that we've seen over and over and over and over.
Yeah, it'd be pretty generic movie. I think it would. Well, it would be worse than what it is now. I'm not saying that I think it's like a particularly bad movie, but it would be. There'd be nothing special about it. I'd have to say. Like,
yeah, it would be like a episode of CSI or something. But the fact that they added the puppets into it really just kind of. it just sets it apart. It's so different. It's a branch off of the old crime stories. And in filmmaking, you always want to try something new, and it might not always work. But for me, this movie worked. I mean, granted, yeah, it's not my favorite movie, but I've seen it at least 3 times now in the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I want you to give me your best, your worst, and your weirdest about the Happytime Gang, or the Happytime Murders.
All right. Okay. I'm going to go with the best moment. Man, that's tough because there's so many really good moments in this movie, and like there's my favorite moment, but I don't think it's the best moment. I think the best moment is probably the sex scene.
Okay.
I mean, it's still my favorite, but just the fact that some dude had to whip around a can of silly string and pretend that it's a dude jizzing all over the room. And then he calms down, like you think it's over, and then he does it again, which doesn't normally happen with humans. I don't know if that's a puppet thing. I think that's my best. The craziest part? Ooh. I think seeing Elizabeth Banks as a stripper, I don't think I've ever seen her in that kind of role.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen her, like, you've seen her as an attractive woman in other roles, but shredding off a carrot into puppet
she wasn't only like a stripper, she was like a dirty stripper.
Like a dirty stripper,
which was funny.
And she played that character well. I don't know if she rehearsed it, but she did a good job.
All right. And the worst?
I don't know if there is a worst because it was all so good, but I'd say, I mean, the worst murder I think would be the one being torn up by the dogs.
Fair enough. So let's see. For my best, I would honestly say it would be Maya Rudolph's character. I know we didn't touch a lot on Maya Rudolph, but she's got such a range. Like she does like, movies where she sings, like she did the Very Merry Christmas, which is one of my favorite Christmas things, where she sings all the time. She's got an amazing voice. But then she also plays this like super meek secretary character who, it seems like a completely different person, which I guess is what the whole point of acting. But yeah, I really thought Maya Rudolph was great in this. The worst was the puppet vagina, like the purple puppet vagina. There was pretty clearly a labia in there, and like if it was just muff, like if it was just hair, and they were just trying to indicate that there was a vagina there, sure, but yeah, I don't need a puppet labia, like, and the weirdest. Yeah, I'd have to say the weirdest is just the fact that I was so thrown off by how unattractive that puppet character looked. Like they were clearly trying to make her like the classic noir, like attractive girl in need that was there, and just like something about the eyes and the face of that puppet was just like she didn't like. I couldn't view her as an attractive human. If I tried to like image her as a human, it just wouldn't work for me. Like I'm sure that probably comes across as misogynistic, but hey, this is Absurdist Asylum. I'm not saying that we're misogynists. I think it was just off-putting in the movie to me. Like if you're going to have a character like that, whose the idea is to make her attractive, I don't know. I feel like I've seen attractive puppets before. I think that says something weird about me, but I don't know. It just didn't work for me. Not saying that I was like watching this movie to get off, but.
They definitely took a lot of female attributes and tried to like blow them up. Like they gave her like big lips and bigger eyes, and she's like the only female puppet that had like a bust. So like I think that's what they were trying to go for, and like I get it, but yeah, I wasn't like oh that's a hot puppet.
So on that strange note, Brad, you got anything else you want to say about this movie?
I want to retract my last statement.
Thanks for stopping by the show. If you want to check us out elsewhere, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Absurdist Asylum. You can email us at absurdasylum@gmail.com. And thanks for stopping by the show. Say goodbye to the people, Brad.
Goodbye, people.
Bye, people.